All right, everyone, welcome. Today we are going to be doing one of our absolute favorite things. It has quickly become a favorite amongst all of our agents, our spotlight interviews. Today we're going to be talking with Adam O'Brien. My name is Kate Stedman. I'm the Director of Agent Development here at Choice. We believe in connecting you guys with the people, systems, and resources that will pack a punch in your business, and recognizing that often they are right in front of us, and the best way we can learn is from those around us. So I'm incredibly excited to bring this dynamic conversation to you today. Adam is an agent that just leaves you lit up when you have a conversation with him. You truly are someone that embodies the principle of operating with both heart, integrity, and strategy. Adam is someone that's been in the business for 6 years. He is known in the downtown Raleigh market. He is an expert in condos. He specializes in relocation clients. He has scaled his business impressively. And most importantly, he is someone that always operates with integrity. He believes in the power of consistency and doing what is right. He believes that when you give it all you've got, you get it back tenfold. And I can't wait for us to have this conversation. Adam, thanks for doing this with us today. I appreciate you.
No, absolutely my pleasure. I'm going to preface this by saying I'm an expert by no means. I'm a trial and error person, and I will listen to anything anybody has to say and see how it applies to me. So we'll
Well,
start with that.
yeah, that's the principle of what we're doing here today as well. And trial and error is how we become an expert. So I will gladly be your cheerleader for that, but I appreciate it. I like to start us all off on kind of a common baseline. Obviously, it's not uncommon for us all to say we've been in it forever, but we all started somewhere. So I would love for you to tell us what you did before you got into real estate, what kind of fanned that flame, and what got you into it.
So I was very young and deciding what I needed to do, needed a job. So I got into restaurant management, which led into a corporate restaurant job. I had 27 restaurants the latter 10 years of my life, spread out between Iowa, Missouri, and North Carolina. If you've ever been to Iowa or Missouri, don't go. Nothing is going on there. But I was only home every 3 weeks for the actual week. And I could pick which state I wanted to live in. The company I worked for ran truck stops, but catered to the professional driver. And they actually have the world's largest truck stop in Walcott, Iowa. Has parking for 1,000 tractor trailers and a dentist, a chiropractor, doctor, all those things you could think of. So there's one here in Kenly, North Carolina, too. Um, so all that being said, they also own the patent of Catskills. So very cash flush company. So got to travel a lot with them. But again, was only home every 3 weeks. That gets old. I did that for 17 years. And I was like, I'm approaching 40. This is not how I want to live the next chapter of my life. So um, got my real estate license, decided that I would do it, part-time. And then I was like, yeah, that's not going to work. Let's just take a leap of faith, forget the six-figure income, jump into it, and go. And so far, so good.
Yeah, and it's funny because when you and I were talking about this originally, you had mentioned all of those things, obviously, and therefore, and to some degree, you were pretty burnt out, right? And I think a lot
Oh,
of us
absolutely.
in real estate are like, oh, what a great industry to get into for that. But I think it's so important for us to take a step back and realize where we came from and why we started doing what we do, and to recognize that we're in control of our business. And that's part of why so many of us get into it. And it's a good reminder, I think, when we think of where we came from and what motivated us to kind of keep that on the forefront. So I wanted to point that out.
Well,
Yeah.
the other thing too is when you have 27 restaurants that open 24/7, um, you think you're in real estate and the calls never end. Try having 27 restaurants that are open 24 hours a day. The calls literally never end. And it burns you out. It does burn you out.
So you decided to get into real estate. Who did you decide to go with? What did that look like as a beginning agent? I know that can be kind of
So,
intimidating.
so I will say, so getting my license, I did weekend classes on Saturdays and Sundays for 5 weekends, and was still working my corporate job Monday through Friday. So it was like never ending for like 5 weeks, which was exhausting as well. But I got out, and ironically, just talking to people. So I started at Berkshire Hathaway in Cameron
In Cameron.
Village office, and I I've valued that experience. I'll say I think big box realty offers a lot of, if you choose the right one, offers a lot of education and a good jumping off point. Um, I was blessed to have a lot of very experienced agents who've been in the business many years, some of them 40 plus, which is because that office started as Prudential. So, uh, very blessed with that. And so I just learned a lot from those guys.
Yeah. And so what does your day-to-day look like when you were first getting in? Because I think that's where a lot of agents that are entering struggle with, even as experienced agents, but like all of a sudden the day is completely yours. What did that look like for you?
So, working a corporate job, I got up at 5:30 every morning. I still get up at 5:30 every morning. That first 30 minutes of the day are mine. But then it's really deep dive into MLS for about 30 minutes. And then it is, I never look at email though, for anything serious until about 8 o'clock in the morning. But I think, you have to have that base knowledge to get going. And then I try to front load my days just because that's old habits. Um, I'm the person that likes to putter around in the afternoon. So, and that's when I do my showings too. I block out my showings. It's rare I do an AM showing, because it just doesn't fit in my time block.
Well, I think it's so important to know what your natural rhythm is in life and not to beat yourself up. As soon as you said 5:30, I was like, I'm instantly out. That is not ever going to be my schedule. And I know that, and so it's good to know. But to your point, I would always start my business days by looking at MLS too, because that's when you see that one house that is perfect for the clients that's been circling forever. And if your day gets going, when will you check back in? So absolutely. What did your lead gen look like? How did you start procuring clients?
So lead gen, my very first year, I only did two transactions. That being said, one was someone who referred the client to me because they didn't want to work with the client, and the other one was an open house. I was very intentional that first year. I did 150 plus open houses that first year. Which was what, 2019. So very intentional with open houses, and we're just doing all of them. I met a ton of people, and I still to this day love an open house, but met a ton of people. I pulled a lot of names and numbers off of those. So and of course follow up on those later. That being said, what I found so interesting in my real estate career is some of those people I've talked to 5 years ago, I'm starting to hear from them now. So it's just because they come to an open house doesn't mean they're ready to buy, but they may, if as long as you have a conversation with them, treat them right, they hang on to your information. So that was one part of lead gen. The other part of that was I got into doing relocation with Berkshire Hathaway. I did a ton of relocation. And I still am to a point, even though I've really dialed it back, but I will go anywhere. Um, it doesn't bother me. I don't have kids or anything. So none of that is there. Um, and then a lot of referrals from other agents. They just sign calls that they would refer, or um, letting me host their open houses and getting the referrals off of those. So that was really my lead gen from that point.
Yeah, and I like what you said about 5 years, right? Like it's so easy for us, myself included. I did a ton of open houses. I never really saw a ton of success with them, but I also was really big into doing prospecting and lead generation for cold leads already. To me, adding more people to my database that I then had to follow up with wasn't going to happen. But if you take in mind the fact that it's such about the client life cycle and it depends on where they are in it, they might not show up and be ready to buy, but just because that's the case does not mean that you had a failed open house, right? And I think that's an important perspective to have. I'm going to spend a good amount of time talking about relocation in a little bit, but I would love to kind of know how you started to migrate into the condo space. But before we do that, I want to kind of talk about how you started to see a need in that market and how it started to call your name.
So you've got to back up for a second. So I decided um, we changed BICs at Cameron Village. And when we changed, I was ready to leave Berkshire Hathaway then. BIC came in and was like, hey, give me 6 months. So we went into coaching and dug really deep into that and started looking at, we did core values. If anybody hasn't done core values, I highly recommend it. Um, and then started working on, where's the hole in the market, right? Because I think successful businesses, real estate, whatever, what you do is you fill that need in the market where there's a hole. Traditionally, downtown's been tied up with one or two agents in condos, and we just happened to notice that there wasn't much going on. That agent was still focused on the developments that they did and not really um, focused on anything new. And also started looking into, it's interesting when somebody sells a condo, it's very rare that the same agent lists that condo. So there was definitely a hole there that needed to be filled.
And that's the whole principle of business, right? A need in the market. Exactly.
Right. So we went down that road, and then he then did some work with Ideal Client. I had a coffee with Ellie, and I was telling her the other week, at one point, my ideal client was pretty broad. As long as you were breathing, had a pulse, and you know, were ready to buy, I would work with you. And then as we've gone down this road, I've developed my ideal client as to what their habits are, where they're at, what type of cologne they wear. Is this a second home for them? Probably no children, probably 35 to 50. Very detailed about these people's habits.
Yeah, and we'll dive into that a lot more,
Sure.
but truly it's not assuming, right? Like even when you and I were talking about it, and I was like, well, as someone who grew up in Raleigh, I would assume that the people that live in the downtown Raleigh market are X, Y, and Z. And you're like, oh, actually, no, this is where they spend their time. This is where they go. And it's by truly ingraining yourself. So we'll get to that more, but that's how you embody it. That's how you get in it. So that's cool. One thing I want to touch on before we really go into condos, though, is when you and I were talking, you mentioned some synchronicities. And if you guys know me, you know I'm all about leading with your heart and following the signs. And it just seemed like there were a lot of signs and repeated thoughts and alignments in where you were finding yourself and the people you were getting connected with as you started having the idea of getting into the condo space. Will you talk about that for a minute? I guess mainly I'm thinking of like the fair weather.
Yeah, so as I've got into this, and it's still an evolving process. I mean, we're only really 2 years, maybe 2.5 years, really into this. But when you start down a road, like the condos, I found myself, I joined, that introduced me to some other people, and I joined the board of directors for Burning Coal Theater. Happened to go to a play, and all of a sudden there were 17 people there who all live in the fair weather. And we're sitting there together, and it's like, these are the people you need to be with, right? Because this is where you want to be. And then those people introduce you to people, and it's a way to get into these buildings and know these people better. Um, and was just sort of a natural progression that I didn't really think about, but it happened.
Absolutely. And then you ended up with a client that wanted one, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Will you talk about that for a minute?
Well, so they wanted to sell. So, so that was that we sold that one. And then that's led to another listing in that same building, which led to another listing in another building on the other side of town. Um, and I say the other side of town, it's literally what downtown is 6 blocks wide if you true downtown. So it's not like it's over many miles away, but so it's sort of naturally progressed, and will probably progress more with continued effort.
Will you talk a little bit, just mention you had mentioned some statistic about having like the highest sales price in that building and no comps, and that it's still the case.
I still have the record for the highest price per square foot in the Fairweather, 615 a foot. That being said, I've only had one person challenge it, and they just withdrew it this week. Um, but nobody's challenging that number downtown. So, and the only person that is actually the highest price per square foot downtown last year, minus one other unit. But but yeah, I mean, so I'm not afraid to push the price on that. So, which has also taught me that not every condo client is a client that is right for me because um, they have to be somebody that wants to, sort of push things. And a fire sale client is not the right condo client for me.
Well, and I think also recognizing that the condo market probably isn't the fire sale client most of the time anyway. So,
Absolutely. We're at something crazy today. It's like 96 days on market average and 601.
woof. So how did you come to that? How did you feel confident in guiding your client on being so far above everyone else? And how, I guess, was it the knowledge of the condos around it and what was available?
So trial and error. No. I am a little bit, I'm never afraid to take a risk, even though I have extreme anxiety and I'm OCD, but I'm not afraid to take that risk. So I was there, I'd already priced it. And knew this client a little bit going in. They had done some crazy upgrades and they were like, "What's your price?" And I told them and they said, "Well, you just named our price." And that's how I got, we went there. People told us we were crazy. That's not going to happen. But in the end, it worked out. So.
And it's such an interesting example because I feel like so often we want to do the opposite. We want to play it safe, maybe go a little bit below market value, try to bid it up. Obviously, it's a case by case situation, but it's important to know what market dynamics are at play and where your clients are and all that fun stuff. So, as you started navigating and moving into that, you got a lot more intentional about targeting the condo space in terms of where you landed in brokerage, how you marketed, what events you attended. Can you just speak more to that and how you truly became ingrained in that community?
Sure. So I said I left Berkshire Hathaway. Couple different factors there, but mainly I went with another brokerage downtown who was already in that space. They were the original builders of the Fairweather or selling agents. So I really got involved in that downtown space. And what that did was connected me with the right people in the city of Raleigh that made good connections and people to network with. Um, it also put me in this space where I think wherever you're working, you need to be around. People need to see you in the community, whether it's going downtown to a restaurant to grab lunch, a bar to have a drink, or a community event, whatever it is. I think that it's important to be on those. And then it was just a sort of a natural progression to go to choice because at the same time you can make your business whatever you want it to be and it's supported.
Yeah. And so when you talked about getting ingrained in that community, we were talking a lot about that the other day. And this is the case with any market, but there's going to be a vast difference, even when you are intentional about trying to be in that community. If you are an agent that's selling a lot and what knowledge you have versus what knowledge the community members have. And so often it can be kind of a whisper network of sorts, especially in kind of that condo space. We were talking about that before. Like, for example, I'm kind of thinking of the Boylan Heights building and how there were supposed to be two and things like that. Would
Right.
you talk a little bit about that and how you got into that and how
Well,
that's
yeah, I mean, so I think being part of the community, you hear about things before they happen or past mistakes, like um, the the, um, the property on Independence. I mean, that was supposed to be two buildings. It got caught up with the DOT, and it's still, sort of has stigmatized that property. It also lets you know. I'm a big reader too, but about things that aren't coming up. And I know we keep talking about the Fairweather a lot. It's just that that building has so much going on around it over in the warehouse district that um, you've got to really stay on top of it. So they're building a 12-story tower behind there that is not off the ground. It was brought to fruition 2 years ago that this was going to happen. Now that it's went through permitting, everybody over there is freaking out. All but one unit is for sale on the back side of the building because they're losing their view of the skyline. So, but a condo client wants to know that, right? So you have to stay on top of those things. And people like Bill King, for example, who's head of Downtown Raleigh Alliance. I mean, that was a great connection. He's telling you things if you just ask him and have a conversation with him about things that are coming up that you may not know about.
yeah. On that note, I would love for you to just share some of your downtown knowledge with us because every time I talk to you, I'm like, oh my gosh, I find out even more. But will you speak to like the 27 buildings and why there's no amenities? I'll ask you a few other questions.
Yeah, so there's truly only about 27-ish true condo buildings downtown. Um, you're seeing a lot of duets pop up that are condo ownership, but that's not really a condo, right? Um, but as far as buildings, a lot of them to cut cost out of them all have no amenities, unless you count, Fairweather has a gym in it. Palladium has no amenities at all other than secure parking, or the Dawson. If you look at the Dawson has absolutely no amenities. They have covered parking. And that becomes important because if you look at the market right now, when I was digging through this, there are 16 resale listings in 601. Um, of those 16, 15 of those listings are in those three buildings. So that becomes important because that HOA fee between those three buildings is about the same. For the smaller units, you're about 350 a month. Some of the larger units, you're pushing about 700 a month. That being said, it's just a matter of where you're living and what you're willing to tolerate not having a lot of amenities. Those buildings were done without that to cut the cost out. And they all had the same listing agent involved in the process, which is interesting too. So
Will you talk? I'm just going to ask a bunch of random questions I've had about downtown, if you don't mind sharing, which is one of
sure.
the ways about that. I don't even remember the name of the building, but the one that had the fire in it. Do you remember that? It was like a few years ago. Um, do you have any idea which one I'm talking about?
Yeah, I can't, the name's escaping my mind at the
Yeah.
moment. That was a wood structure that most condo buildings should be concrete and steel, which is not always the case. That was a wood structure that probably shouldn't have been permitted, but it was there. That space is still just there as well. So um,
What
there.
is
Go
what is
ahead.
the parking situation? How do parking spaces operate? Is that confusing for clients? How do you navigate that? Is that a silly question?
Parking spaces. Most units have one, or sometimes with a 2 or 3 bedroom unit, you can get two. Um, I had a listing at the Palladium. It had four, which is unheard of. But where you end up like some of the ones, the new units over in '03 over on Peace Street, and they sold all the parking. So the last two units had no parking, which is odd, right? At least you should have guaranteed them one spot. But parking. People who are truly downtown people and looking for condos, parking is less of an issue for them because they understand the downtown lifestyle.
Are most of the people that are looking in downtown at condos strictly focusing in that area, or are they looking in the village district or anywhere else? What do you kind of see in terms of
So
their
we're
preference?
not known as a condo city, right? So, we like to think we're such a big growing city, but we're still a small town in the South. We don't have the condo market that you have in New York or Chicago or LA even. That being said, you have to sort of look all over, but a client that wants to live in an '01 or an '03 isn't necessarily looking anywhere other than those two. Of course, the two newest buildings are being built over in '04. You've got the Enterprise and the Lansing, which will be the two newest projects. Again, those two buildings coming out of the ground are billing themselves as luxury with no amenities.
So interesting. Well, we can get into that later, but I'm curious if most people come expecting amenities and then are surprised by that, or if that doesn't really matter to them as much with, I guess, maybe walking distance to gyms if it's an option.
So recently, I've had several agents from outside of the area refer themselves for condos, and it's interesting. They're very shocked that these buildings don't have amenities because they're used to those in Denver, Portland, LA.
So I want to circle back to that because I know we talked about it at the front end, but you truly know your ideal client to a T. And obviously, the vast majority of us are going to have completely different clients, but I would love for you to just kind of hyper define who your person is because I think hearing you explain it gives other agents kind of some insight to be like, oh, wow, the depth at which you know these people is something that I need to work on for myself because the more you know them, the more you know where they're going to be. And it's not just price point and what they're shopping for, but where they spend their time. And you and I were kind of talking about that in terms of like what bars and restaurants they go to and where they do spend their time. Would you just talk about that for a minute?
Sure. So my ideal client currently, and it changes, a little bit with shifts in the market. Right now, we're at 35 to 50 years old. These people, Raleigh is either a second home to them for work, or that it is a permanent residence that they are just looking for small space. Uh, Usually, they are childless or grandparents. They tend to shop. Frugally, but they what we would typically say would have money. These people, when they talk about cars, they don't talk about the actual derivative of the car when you ask them. So if somebody says, "What kind of car do you drive?" They drive a Mercedes or a BMW. They don't drive a X5 or a C300 or they're not showing off, right? They're just telling you the car they have. These people are foodies usually. They like live music. They like craft breweries. And they like places that are not necessarily trendy, but where they feel comfortable.
Yeah, like that mom and pop vibe, kind of a one-off.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I know we had mentioned this on the front end, but you have a lot of experience in relocation. And if we're talking about the condo market and that we're not necessarily one, you and I talked a lot about the fact that your ideal client is very often someone that is not already in Raleigh. Can you speak to that? And then I would love to dive into relocation some.
Yeah. So yeah, what I found is that the clients buying these condos are not up buying in Raleigh. These are people that are coming from out of state, uh, DC, New York, Austin, larger cities that typically have condos. They're used to a downtown lifestyle, um, and, and they're migrating here. So anytime I do marketing or anything for a condo, that's where I'm marketing is to those cities. I spend very little time marketing it in Raleigh.
Will you talk about that marketing? Because I know when we talk about marketing to those cities, it makes total sense if you hear about the inbound migration, but then figuring out how to tangibly do that can be a little confusing. I know you mentioned some of the ways you do that. Will you speak to
Yep,
those?
you can go to Visitors Bureau or you can go to the chamber and they can tell you what are the top places that people are coming from. And then, I've never really done print in another city, but I target social ads in those cities. Usually the top six seems to get the biggest buck. When you do that though, you have agents reach out to you, and they're like, "Well, I think your marketing is off, or your strategy is off, or whatever, because I'm seeing your ads and I'm in Riverside, California," which I had placed that ad because that's where people were moving from at the time. So yeah, people think you're crazy, but you seem to find a lot of interest in those condo buildings, and you also people now they start to see your name in those cities, so that when I've actually had two clients that came from running ads, but they bought single family homes, but came from running those ads in other cities.
Right. And so it's kind of a Venn diagram of sorts of where are
Yeah,
people moving from? Who of those people are condo people? And then let me market to those and
right.
know who that is, right? Like New York and
I mean, because when you place an ad, is everybody's seeing it. It's not just somebody who's buying a condo. So, which is fine. If they like the marketing, then they decide that maybe you're the agent for them.
what is your process for relocation when you get introduced to someone? Do you typically do kind of a like exploration day or do you sit down and just give them a rundown of the buildings? Obviously, I'm sure it's specific to each client, but just curious.
Depends on the client, what the timeline is. Can we meet in person? A lot of these clients, when they do come to town, they're here for a day, maybe a weekend, and time is still limited then because they want to do other things. They need to explore Raleigh and what's going on. So, always anytime you ever get a lead, jump on it immediately because time is your enemy. Um, the longer you let that lead sit there and not work it, the likelihood that they're going to use someone else. So start immediately, all the details. And then when they come to town, yes, I want you in the car with me because I'm going to talk your ear off. I'm that source of useless information.
Well, and if we're talking about downtown, if you're not riding with me, then we're never gonna see each other because of the amount of time we're gonna try to spend like finding parking and meeting up and figuring out where we're even supposed to be for the lockbox and all that fun stuff,
Right,
so.
which is the fun part of downtown because you can, like, again, living in a small city in the South, right? You can basically walk everywhere you need to go.
Um, Talking about relocation, I'm curious, are you really intentional about forming referral relationships with agents in those places that you have heard we have inbound migration from?
It wasn't necessarily from inbound migration, but I took the top 100. Um, I sent out, well, not the top 100, but I sent out 100 packets nationwide. I put together, it was literally two keychains that said, were like the cutout of state of North Carolina with like a cardinal and said North Carolina on it, and a little referral card, and stuck them in a 8 by 10 manila envelope and a little note, and sent it to just random agents across the country. I they weren't really random. I picked these agents through there is a LGBT alliance network nationwide. So I picked 100 agents out of that and sent it to those agents because there was already something in common there, and something to build on. So, you know, that helps establish that sum as well, because there are other people in their office and they're like, hey, do you know an agent, in North Carolina? Then sometimes that makes that connection as well.
Did you get any results from that, or was it mainly just
I've
dropping the nugget?
I've had one.
Yeah, it takes time.
One.
Yeah. It's normally when they call you and then all of a sudden you build that relationship.
Right, I mean, anything you do, though, I feel like in this business, this is not the instant gratification business. This is time nurturing, and making sure that you are on 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 purpose, right? I mean, you have to be intentional.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that I said in your intro. That was one of the things that we talked a lot about was just the power of consistency and just showing up and making sure that you're being consistent in your actions. I'd love to talk a little bit more about your marketing. Would you share what you're doing now, both in terms of social media, mailers, newsletters? Just how do you keep in touch with your people?
I am not a social media person. I absolutely hate social media. I wish it would go away, which I know won't happen, but I believe in pouring in buckets that you get something out of, and that is not something I get. Do I have a social media presence? Yes. Do I post a ton? No. Um, I don't get anything out of that bucket, so I don't pour a lot into it. I get more out of going down here to the bar and having a drink and knowing that bartender than I do making an Instagram reel. And there's nothing wrong with that, don't get me wrong. But I was having dinner last night and I literally watched these two ladies at Oku sit there. They spent their entire meal filming this food to make what, a 30-second reel, if that. And that I'm just not that person, right? But so I don't pour into that bucket, but I do um, get out and meet people because I think that that's where my leads come from. That's where I'm pulling those from. So I spend a lot of time doing face to face. Um, Anytime I do a sell of a property, even single family detached homes, those just sold, just listed postcards are going to condo buildings. It's for no other fact than, one, a postcard is not going to sell your property 9 times out of 10. Number two, it puts my face back in front of the people in the condos. Um, the other thing that I've done, this is sort of not current, but I've been thinking about doing these again with doing like 8 by 8 campaigns to get into a building. That really works well, or it works good to get into a neighborhood too. One piece of interaction for 8 weeks with a group of people, um, ending with an event of some sort or something that you can invite them to. That works really well as well. Currently, though, I've running some social ads. Um, Listings are always good for referral sources as well, especially marketing in other cities. I seem to get a lot of calls off of those.
Oh, interesting. And when you say marketing in other cities, you still mean like Facebook ads marketing your listing?
Facebook ads. Denver was the last call I got was Denver. She referred herself for a condo. It was off of a listing. She called about that listing and was like, "Oh, well, I don't really want that listing, but I want to work with you." So there we
How
are.
cool. Yeah, some of the things that I wrote down as you were talking is one, the power of presence, right? And like if you were going to spend time being somewhere and you know it is something that fills your bucket, then just be intentional about showing up and knowing that that is why you were there and just being present and not necessarily being tied to an outcome from it, but just knowing that like just by being here, I'm working my business and whatever is for me will show up for me in that moment. But at the very least, I'm forming these connections or providing these opportunities instead of sitting there on your phone. But I also think, I talk with agents all the time, and it's so funny because people are so fast to beat themselves up over lead generation or marketing strategies that just don't at all work for them and feel so forced and feel so draining and time consuming. And I think it's just so valuable to know that there are a million ways to do it. And just because it works for someone else doesn't mean it has to work for you. And that's okay to give yourself that permission. So I like to talk about that. The 8x8 thing, it's funny. I saw this when I was first getting into real estate. I've never been able to find it since, but there is a study that was done by a marketing company where they created a completely fake real estate firm and they polled a neighborhood and asked all of the members, who would you use if you were to sell your home tomorrow? It was a whole list of people. They did an 8x8 campaign where they sent mailers once a week to that community for 8 weeks, and then they polled them again. And there were a sizable number of people that said that they would use this fake company, and they'd done absolutely no research, right? And so it just really proves the power of getting in front of people. And I ended up doing that as well. I had not done any print mail for 3 years of my business, and then I started doing that. And obviously the client life cycle helps, but it just getting in front of them really, really matters.
Eh, The,
Um,
the other thing that I'll insert here that maybe this isn't necessarily the right time to insert it, but I was very lucky with a handful of older experienced agents that I partnered with because they shared their knowledge and what they did and are great. I mean, we still bounce. Erica Broughton's one of them. I mean, we still bounce tons of ideas off of each other and um, you know help each other in business any way we can. And I think those things are important too. I mean, it's not just so much from the client perspective, but I think it's also with who you surround yourself with.
Amen. I'm all about that. That's why we do these, share our knowledge and learn from each other. I'd love to, one more thing. I know we mentioned when we chatted before that you had done newsletters. Do you still do those? And what does that
I
look like?
do. So I did take a hiatus. Like, we all like to think we're on top of our game, but let's face it, we're human. We drop the ball occasionally. My newsletter fell off last year, but I just faced it forward when I started it again this year. I was like, hey, I always put a note for me in there, and I was like, hey, I've been absent, but I'm back. I just call it for what it is. I do that. That is one of the things I do because that is one of my buckets that I get return on. Even if it's just having conversations about real estate or just calling or older clients calling to catch up, right? Because that means that they're still involved. Plus, it's another touch, right? I'm 2 touches a month. I use my newsletter as one, and the other one is usually some type of a mailer of some sort. Um, I'm not a phone person either. I'm not going to call you and shoot the BS because that's not me. I'm not a phone person. So those are my 2 touches. Do with them what you want.
Do you do any events?
I have done a couple of events. I think, I think what I've learned in those is I would rather take people to lunch or buy you a drink than do an event.
Yeah, actually one-on-one. And I think that's another thing too, not only what Legion lights you up, but what group size lights you up and what level of planning lights you up, and stick to
But
those things. I'm not an event planner. I hate that. Do not want to spend a ton of time planning all of this and hoping you show up. I'd much rather be like, this is where I'll be. Come join me if you want to,
that's
which
right, exactly. I mean, and I'm a huge bourbon drinker, so you want to grab a drink? Let's go. I'm down.
I know you mentioned doing mailers when you get a listing. Before I kind of change topic slightly, are there any other must-do items that you do when you get a listing?
Do your homework. Know the property in and out, backwards, forwards. Um, And if you think it's not important to someone, then that's the thing that you need to focus on, that you need to know. Put eyes on the property. And, so many agents are guilty of not going in the crawl space, not going in the attic. I think you need to do those things. I think you just need to know the property. Uh, because then it makes, then you're not sitting there when somebody is asking you questions like, oh, I'll have to find out. Let me ask the seller, those type things. So that homework's always a big part of that. Um, and then, like I said, there's the social piece of it. There's the actual marketing of it. I like to do open houses, so I do my own open houses. But I think, just as maximum exposure always.
And when you talk about doing your homework, it's interesting you say that because one of the things that I thought of, especially in your market, is I can just picture a buyer coming into a space and having a question for their agent that that agent does not know. And then they call you as a listing agent. You give them some incredibly detailed answer that's probably above and beyond what they would have been interested in. And then who knows down the road when this buyer then goes to sell, they might be thinking, well, that guy sure did know that market. Let me give him a call. It's kind of, you never know how that might rub off on people that could then become your client down the road. So love
Well,
that.
the other thing I told you earlier, I'm OCD, and I've learned that it takes me going over something in my head about 41 times to process it. So I don't like surprises. So I always, send my sellers a homework sheet and tell them the good, the bad, the ugly, put it all on there. Because we need to know, mainly it's for me, I need to process it to get my head around it. But it does make you the agent of knowledge. And the agent of knowledge wins in this market. When the market's up in the air like it is, um, whoever knows the most wins.
I'd love to get into your day to day. That's so true. I'd love to get into your day to day. What are the systems that you use the most, and what do you feel is the most important aspect of the client life cycle that you really hone in on?
The through the life cycle part, just the biggest thing that I have found is stay in touch. That part that where nothing is going on is the most important part. They need to know you're still breathing. They need to know you're still there. Um, because that life cycle is different for everyone. I've had some clients that it was the shortest one I've had is 7 months. Um, I turned two twin sisters around. They both brought separate properties, decided that they didn't want to live separately when we sold those properties after we bought them. Um, and of course, this was during COVID when everything was crazy. But so that part's really important because again, that cycle is different for everyone. My day to day is very time blocked. Time block your day. And I don't really change it much for anyone. I know that sounds like a horrible answer, but if it's till noon, my time block's pretty set.
Well, scarcity creates value. So if you appear busy, and then they're going to want to work with you even more. And I think that it's so easy to forget that when maybe we're low on clients or we're eager to get them closed. But on that note, in terms of getting things done and being busy and growing your business, have you ever hired anyone? What does it look like in terms of how you've
I have
scaled?
not. At some point maybe. So with switching agencies, there was a dip in business. I've also we keep talking about all the, Gen Lead and all these places. I went 100% referral based, which is a little scary. It did cause a shift in my business a little bit, but at the same time, now that we're several years removed from that, I'm doing, more GCI than I was working with everyone and getting leads from different, many different places. But we totally that referral basis seems to be that sweet spot for me. Because I'm not going to buy leads. That's just throwing money out there in the wind, hoping that somebody is going to buy a house. And then you end up working with people that you don't necessarily click with, or that have you running, all around the triangle, which doesn't necessarily, it takes your time per hour, and my time is valuable to me, and uh, their time's valuable to them as well.
Yeah, important to look at lead generation from the time commitment standpoint and your value. That's so true. You have not hired a transaction coordinator, but you have implemented some AI. Would you speak to both of those things?
Yep. So I started using, I have not hired a transaction coordinator, but transaction coordinating is the bane of my existence. I absolutely hate it. Um, that being said, the only some AI, I started using Motion AI. So you sit down once a week, throw everything in there that you can think of. You can even specify dates and times, and it helps you generate your calendar for the week. Because some activities are reoccurring, they'll always be there, but you can throw things in. Um, of course, it's an app. It's reading your phone, your text, and everything, and helping you generate um, uh, events for the week, even to the point that it knows that you're not doing what you said you were going to do. So it'll move it and remind you that you need to do it.
Yeah, and I think we can all relate to being nervous to give up control and not loving transaction coordination and but still knowing that we want to maintain that aspect of our relationship. And so just finding what works for you, whether that's templates or rhythms and yeah,
Oh,
leaning in.
absolutely. I mean, I'm a big email template person. You don't have a lot of restaurants without using templates a lot, ugly ones and nice ones, that are easy to get out and quickly. That helps streamline your process. I think, there's a place for transaction coordinators. Right now in my business, I don't have that place.
Totally. And things can change. You can try it
That's
out for
right.
yourself or you
Absolutely.
cannot. It's
Absolutely.
totally up to you. There's no one way. As we kind of pivot, I would love all agents are curious on how people are handling the settlement. And I would love to just know how you are navigating that in terms of mindset, what that means in terms of how you're approaching your clients and what that means in your business.
Again, so we've talked about the knowledge agent wins, and kudos to Brian and you guys for providing us with as much knowledge as possible. But I was, doing dual enrolled with two different agencies here for a while, and the other agency never talked about it. So um, I think meeting it head on is the way to go. You were talking about newsletter. For my clients, I've included I did wrote a little article, 7 myths about the settlement, and just we got ahead of this 3 months ago and really start putting it in front of them. And then keep having these conversations about how to address it with your clients, because I think that, practice makes perfect. And um, unless you're doing it and you practice it, even if it's just talking to yourself, which we're all guilty of, right? Have that conversation in your mind. What does that conversation look like? Um, they're not really difficult conversations as long as you know how you're going to present it. It becomes difficult when you don't know what to say. I think that it's going to change the landscape some. But that being said, I think that in the long run, we adjust. Agents have also adjusted to anything that's thrown out there, and I think that we'll adjust, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing.
And I mean, there's so many things that you said, but one, as you were talking, you're like, it becomes easier when, and I thought this is where you were headed, but based on what you said, I'm going to say it anyway, which is it becomes easier when you know your value, right? Like I think
Absolutely.
when we don't know what to say, but also we don't know our value, how can we communicate that if we don't know it for ourselves? And so being confident in what you provide and what that is worth and what your time is worth and not just the time in that transaction, but all the time that you've spent to your point, becoming the agent of knowledge and therefore the agent of value. And so kind of standing on that, I think is really, really important.
Well, I
Also,
said this a little earlier. Like if the person wanted to do the fire sale on something, I'm not the agent for you, because that's going to take just as much time and effort on my part, and I'm not that person who is going to I know my value, and that person that's doing that fire sale is they're going to want that commission cut. They're going to want those things done cheaper, and that's just not my style.
Yeah, and I mean, I've said this a million times. You just said it yourself. If practice it all the time. If we were to get up on a stage and give some big speech, we would practice and practice, right? Practice in your car, listen to how someone else says it, ask their permission to record it, listen to it back. I will say it happily. I am a sponge. Like I like to hear things on repeat, and then I will say it to myself in the car over and over. And and yet, as agents, when we say go practice your listing presentation or go practice your buyer presentation, go practice how you explain the NAR settlement, it's kind of an instant no, or it's a, okay, I'll do this like 3 or 4 times and that's enough. When in reality, like if we were to, I went on Shark Tank, I practiced all the time. I knew every single question they would ever ask me. I've never been more prepared for something in my life. And yet that was one moment in front of a group of 5 people. We do this every single day. This is our career. This is how we make our paychecks. These are hundreds of thousands of dollars of assets. Why do we not feel that we need to practice? And so I just want to kind of hone in on that. And if you don't know how to practice because you don't yet know what to say, then to Adam's point, be that sponge, be that agent that's absorbing the knowledge from the ones that are more experienced, see how other people are saying it, and then just start practicing and see what resonates with you. And we're not here to regurgitate things. We have to find it in a way that's authentic to the way that we want to explain it. But the more you get comfortable knowing the baseline of it, the easier it'll be to explain. So that's awesome. Well, as we kind of wrap up, I wanted to touch on a few more things real quick. One, I always like to ask this question. What is the one thing you always make sure that you have time for, no matter how busy you get, whether this is something in your business or in your life, like the gym or prospecting, whatever the case may be?
It's that time from 5:30 to 6 every morning. That 5:30 to 6 every morning is my time that as I get older, I like to putter around, and that's just I never sacrifice that. I'm not a get out of bed and rush into the day type person. I have to have that 30 minutes, and I never sacrifice that.
And I mean, mindset too is so big, and starting your day with the right mindset and knowing that you've got a moment to yourself so that you can do that. What real estate is huge on mindset. What mindset do you make sure is kind of your foundation going into all of this?
So with mindset, I believe again, read as much as possible. And I'm not a huge book reader, but read as much as possible. I like short snippets and stuff, but read, I also think from a mindset, um, you know, be that person that I always is positive in life because life's too negative. Just be happy go lucky. I'm a work in progress on that. But yeah, you've got to be positive about it. Don't let it get you down. And when it does get you down, it's okay to wallow. If you had a bad deal, you had a bad day, wallow for a few minutes, but snap out of it and get on with it.
So on that note, what is your favorite mantra if you have one? And what do you do when you need to shake things up? Obviously, reading is great, but curious what you do when you need to get excited.
So excuse the language, but sometimes you just need your ass kicked. I like to surround myself with people who are pushers and doers and keep you moving forward. I don't really have a mantra. I just you have one life, live it, right? Live it to the fullest. I think that, and it's okay, if you let your business slip and you haven't done anything for a month or two and you've just been living it up, that's fine. Get back into the business. But just because again, it's going to take a few months to get you out of that hole, but it's okay. We're human. We make mistakes. You've got to learn to forgive yourself.
Absolutely. Anything else that you want to add before we wrap it up? I'm going to open it up for questions, but anything that you want to share in terms of strategy or what's been on your heart that you want other agents to know?
No, I would say that probably the biggest change in my career, we didn't touch on this, was get a coach or a mentor or somebody that is just going to pour into you as much as you pour into them, and somebody that is a mirror in front of you and going to tell you your truth. It can't be your best friend because they're not going to be truthful to you. It has to be somebody that is going to really push you there. And then the other thing, surround yourself with people um, that again they're pouring into you, and you complement each other. All my business partners that I work with, and when I say partners, I mean we all have our separate businesses. We all work together on stuff, but it's about finding people that you click with and you sort of are able to bounce ideas off of.
Gotta have someone that calls it like it is. And I love what you said about being a mirror because so often everything in our life is all of our projections, all of the successes or failures that we seem to be having. It's all a mirror to what's happening on our internal world. So knowing what that baseline is and how you kind of get back to it is so important. Thanks for sharing this. This has been
Absolutely.
wonderful. I appreciate it. I want to open it up to all of our agents that are here today. You guys came for a reason. If there was anything that you hoped we touched on that we didn't, I would love to hear from you. Either unmute or pop it in the chat. If there is anything that you want to know about the condo market, you have your expert hot and ready on the line at the moment. Anything you guys want to share? All right, y'all. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I love these. These are always my favorite. No matter how long you've been in it, it's always empowering to see how other people are doing things. It's always empowering to find other ways to explore your business or how to evolve, right? Like we all start somewhere, we all grow, and then sometimes it pivots. And so this is your permission to do that and kind of cherry pick what works for you. Thank you guys so much for being here today. I will be sure to get this out in a recording later today.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Adam.
Bye, y'all.